This story is about Khalil Evans, a black bartender in Midtown Manhattan, who lost his job for helping a woman during what looked like a meltdown at a high-end political fundraiser. What he didn't know was that the woman was Senator Eleanor Reed, and that his simple act of kindness would trigger a massive exposure of a hidden system of discrimination behind one of America's most respected hotel chains. What came next wasn't revenge. It was revolution. You people always find a way to insert yourselves where you're not wanted. That's what Richard Halston, general manager of the Rosewood Midtown, whispered when he handed Khalil Evans the final paycheck he didn't ask for. But let's rewind 16 hours. Because none of this started with a fight. It started with a single, quiet decision to help someone who was breaking. Khalil had been working the Rosewood's late shift for 3 years. The kind of shift where you learn to move silently, smile politely, and stay invisible. But that night wasn't like any other. A senator was in the room, Eleanor Reed, one of the most photographed women in New York politics, always polished, always poised. But not tonight. It was 1:47 a.m. when she stumbled near the corner bar, hand trembling around her glass of club soda. No makeup, no staff around her, just a blank stare into the floor. Khalil noticed. Not because she was famous, but because she looked exactly like his sister did that one night in 2016 when she got the news their father's lungs had failed. Quiet collapse disguised as silence. He walked out from behind the bar, knowing the rules, knowing cameras were watching, and gently said, "Ma'am, may I get you some water?" Eleanor didn't even look up. She muttered something about her son's name. Theo then said, "I didn't expect it to come back." She was talking to herself. Khalil caught the glass before it hit the floor and nodded to a nearby security guard. "She's not drunk," Khalil whispered. "She's in shock." He guided her toward a side exit, away from the paparazzi outside shielding her with his own coat, as rain began to fall. 10 minutes later, she was in a black SUV with tinted windows mumbling a barely coherent thank you. He didn't ask for her name. He didn't take a picture. He just walked back inside soaked and finished his shift. It was 2:34 a.m. when he clocked out. No one said a word. By noon, the footage was clipped, the security report filed, and Richard Halston's mind was already made up. Inappropriate interaction with a guest during a private event was the phrase he repeated as he slid the paperwork across the polished desk. Khalil sat frozen. Not because he didn't expect this. He'd seen it happen to other staff too, but because this time it was different. He'd done everything right, and it still wasn't enough. "You can keep the tie," Halston added with a half smirk. It was company issued. Khalil walked out, carrying a single envelope and a quiet boiling storm inside him. He didn't call his mother. He didn't post online. He sat on the train, home hands clenched in his lap, remembering Eleanor's empty stare and how it mirrored a kind of pain people like Halston never had to understand. But he also remembered something else. The security guard didn't stop him. The servers didn't raise a brow. And someone in that hotel had watched and stayed silent. As the train pulled into Harlem, 125th, Khalil's phone buzzed. A blocked number. The text simply read, "Meet me at Cafe Atlas, 5 p.m., ER." He stared at the screen stunned. He hadn't told her his name. He hadn't left a number, but she'd found him anyway. And deep down, something told him this wasn't over. Not even close. "Meet me at Cafe Atlas, 5 p.m., ER." That text lived in Khalil's pocket, like a pulse throbbing with questions. He didn't know what Eleanor Reed wanted, or why she'd gone out of her way to find him. But he knew one thing for sure. You don't ignore a U.S. senator, especially when she finds you. By 4:47 p.m., he was sitting at a weathered table near the back wall of Cafe Atlas, a little Harlem cafe with cracked tile floors and chipped coffee mugs that felt more honest than the Rosewood ever did. He wore the only collared shirt he had left sipping bitter houseblend, eyes fixed on the rain tapping against the window. At exactly 5:00 p.m., she walked in. No aides, no blazer. Just a woman in jeans and a gray wool coat, with eyes that looked older than her face. She sat down across from him without waiting for a greeting. "You were fired because of me," she said. Khalil blinked. "I figured that out around hour 2. Eleanor didn't flinch. She took out her phone, tapped a few times, and slid it across the table. On screen was a single email from Rosewood Midtown's guest services. The subject line, "Exemplary staff conduct." Dated the morning after the gala. Her note to the hotel praised Khalil's calm professional response. The reply thanked her and promised a commendation. No complaints, no warning, nothing, she said. "So when I heard you were terminated, I started pulling strings." Khalil felt his pulse climb. "You mean you didn't?" "I didn't file anything," she cut in. "But someone used my name. That's why I'm here." That moment cracked something in him. For days, Khalil had been telling himself that none of it mattered, that it wasn't personal. But hearing it confirmed that it had all been fabricated, shattered the final bit of restraint he was clinging to. "So they lied," he said slowly. "They used you to get rid of me." "They've been doing it for years," Eleanor said, pulling out a thin folder and opening it right on the cafe table. Inside were spreadsheets, employee rosters, firing records. "This isn't about you. It's bigger. Halston has a pattern. Black front-facing staff disappear after vague infractions. Latinos are pushed to back-of-house roles after good reviews. And white hires. They stick. Even the bad ones." "How do you know all this?" Khalil asked. "I'm not just a guest," she said. "My campaign's investment portfolio includes shares in Clarion Group, the parent company that owns the Rosewood chain. I've been quietly tracking HR activity since last fall." Her voice darkened. "And there's another reason I care. My son Theo. He's biracial. And last year Halston blocked his application to the Rosewood Youth Internship Program. Called him unsuitable off record. I never forgot that." Khalil didn't respond. He was still staring at the names on the spreadsheet, names he recognized. Jamal from Valet. Tanya from Guest Services. Even Reggie the pastry chef who disappeared last winter without explanation. "They made us feel like we did something wrong," he whispered. "Every single time." Eleanor nodded. "I know. And now we do something right. I'm building a case. I want you in." Khalil exhaled. The weight of his own silence pressed against his ribs. He thought of his mother, who used to clean courthouse floors before arthritis claimed her knees. She always told him, "Your dignity isn't what they give you. It's what you refuse to lose." He met Eleanor's eyes. "What do you need? Testimony, internal details, people who trust you, and—" She hesitated. "Someone willing to lead." "I'm opening a hospitality cooperative, right here in Harlem, staff-owned, no invisible ceilings. I want you to run it." Khalil froze. "Why me?" "Because you helped me," Eleanor said simply. "Not because of who I was, but because I looked like I was drowning. And you stepped in without hesitation." She paused, then added, "That's the kind of person I want, leading a place that redefines value." The rain had stopped, but inside, Khalil felt a storm start. Not one of anger, but of clarity. This wasn't about reclaiming a job. It was about reclaiming truth. And Eleanor wasn't offering charity, she was offering a fight. One that had already begun. One that now had a name. As he stepped out into the Harlem twilight, Khalil knew the days of quiet survival were over. The time for watching had passed. Now it was time to act. The time for watching had passed. Now it was time to act. But Khalil knew one thing before stepping into this storm: no one takes down a system alone. Not even with a senator on your side. The next morning he returned, not to the Rosewood, but to the building across the street. From the second-floor co-working cafe, he could see the service entrance clearly. The same one where Jamal used to sneak him boxed pastries after double shifts. The same one where Tanya once cried alone behind a stack of dish bins, after being passed over for a promotion she trained her white replacement to do. He opened a notebook and wrote one word at the top: names. He needed people, witnesses, patterns. But more than that, He needed believers, those who had lived through it, not just observed it. People who didn't just want revenge, but truth. The first call he made was to Reggie the pastry chef. It went to voicemail. The second was to Tanya, who picked up after the second ring. She sounded stunned to hear his voice. "Is this real?" she asked. "I saw the news, the email chain, but I didn't know if I could trust it." "You can," Khalil replied. "I'm not just trying to get back at them. I'm trying to prove what we lived through wasn't in our heads. And I need you." There was silence. Then Tanya spoke, her voice quieter. "You remember Lisa front desk? She's got something. An audio file." Khalil's heart kicked. Of Halston. Of Halston and two of the board reps. "You'll want to hear it." That evening, Lisa met Khalil at the roof of an old tenement building a block from Lenox Avenue. She didn't trust cafes. She didn't trust lobbies. She wore a hoodie and kept her phone on airplane mode. "I shouldn't even be talking to you," she said, handing him a flash drive. "But I saw how they did you. I heard what Halston said the night after you got fired. And I recorded it." Khalil took the drive with trembling fingers. "Why did you keep it?" "Because I thought maybe one day someone would care enough to use it." Her voice cracked. "No one ever has." He plugged it into his laptop as she stood beside him, arms crossed, eyes darting toward the fire escape as if someone might climb at any moment. Then the voices began. "Halston. He's gone. One less liability. Frankly, I'm surprised it took this long." "Board member. But you said the senator was pleased." "Halston. She is. She thanked us. Or at least she will when this disappears." "Board member. And the others." Halston, slowly. "No more than one every few weeks. We rotate them out quietly. One grievance, and we call it unprofessionalism. Two, and they're gone. They never fight it. Too tired. Too broke." The audio cut off. Khalil's jaw clenched. Lisa sat down, suddenly exhausted. "You see now, it wasn't just you. It was never just you." He nodded. "Then they picked the wrong one to leave standing." That night, Khalil and Tanya started building a timeline. A spreadsheet of every firing, demotion, and transfer they could trace over the past 2 years. It formed a shape, something ugly and deliberate. But they needed more. Something recent, something active. They needed someone still on the inside. Reggie called back on the third day. "Dude, you're blowing up," he said. "I'm seeing your name in group chats. You serious about this? Dead serious? I got a cousin still working back of house. Dishwasher. No ties to anyone. He's got eyes. And he's got a phone." A day later, Khalil received his first photo. A clipboard. Shift assignments. On the surface, normal. But on closer look, something disturbing. Every front of house name white. Every back of house not. Reggie's cousin circled it in red. Wrote Halston's new rule. Only neutral aesthetics up front. Khalil took the image straight to Eleanor. She barely blinked. Exactly what I needed. He wasn't just collecting stories anymore. He was building a case file. Lisa gave him more recordings, some grainy, some garbled, but all damning. Tanya dug up old performance reviews, where glowing feedback mysteriously turned into write-ups just before terminations. Reggie's cousin kept the photos coming, bathroom stalls with racist graffiti never cleaned, and managers laughing at accents over staff radios. With every file, the pattern sharpened. And so did Khalil. He wasn't sleeping much. He didn't feel like he needed to. Each piece of evidence felt like a drop of gasoline on a fire that had waited years to burn. But in between the files and phone calls, he kept remembering something his mom used to say: "Don't just fight to win. Fight to end the cycle." He wasn't fighting for himself anymore. He was fighting to make sure no kid with the wrong last name or skin tone ever had to shrink themselves to get a paycheck. By the end of week 2, Khalil had built a war chest: photos, audio, internal rosters, HR memos. All cross-referenced, all verified, and all tied directly to one man. It was time to show the world what neutral aesthetics really meant. And soon, Halston would realize the people he thought were invisible. They were watching. And this time, they were ready to be seen. They were watching. And this time, they were ready to be seen. The day the first leak went public, Khalil sat on the fire escape of his building in Harlem laptop, balanced on one knee, heart beating like a war drum. He didn't send it anonymously. He wanted the world to know who was behind it. The caption read, "What neutral aesthetic really looks like inside Rosewood Midtown's hiring system." Attached were 3 internal documents, 4 photos, and a 3-minute audio clip of Halston laughing about rotating liabilities. Within 6 hours, it hit 10,000 retweets. By midnight, it had crossed 2 million views. The comment section was a war zone. Some people were shocked, others weren't. But the public consensus was loud and clear. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This was engineered exclusion. Eleanor called at 6:17 a.m. "We push now," she said. "No delays." Khalil met her an hour later in a brownstone, just off Adam Clayton Powell Jr. Boulevard, where her campaign's private team had set up a temporary war room. On the wall was a map of Rosewood properties, red dots across the Northeast. "It's not just Midtown," she said. "Same patterns in Boston, D.C., Philly. Different managers, same code. This is systemic." Khalil glanced at the headlines scrolling across the monitor behind her. Senator Reid, linked to whistleblower case against hotel giant. His name was there too, in bold. And beside it, a phrase he never thought he'd see: employee rights organizer. "Are you ready for what comes next?" Eleanor asked. "I'm not sure anyone's ever ready," Khalil replied. "But I'm not backing out." Later that day, a press conference was announced. Eleanor would address the media with a former Rosewood employee and multiple corroborating witnesses. Halston wasn't named, but he didn't need to be. That same evening, while prepping statements with Tanya and Lisa, Khalil received a message from an unknown number. Just 2 words: careful, cameras. He froze. The apartment had no security system. He peered out the window. A black car sat idling across the street. The driver didn't move. No plates on the front. "You're being watched," Lisa said, appearing behind him. She wasn't surprised. They always do this. Intimidation stage. Step 1. Khalil felt a chill crawl up his spine, but then came anger. Of course they were watching. That's what people like Halston did, try to scare you into silence. But this wasn't silence anymore. This was movement. The next morning, Khalil walked up the courthouse steps, flanked by Eleanor and 5 other former employees. Protesters lined the sidewalk. News crews pointed microphones. For the first time in weeks, Khalil didn't feel alone. In the rotunda, as they waited to enter the hearing room, Lisa handed Khalil a small laminated card. It was her father's union badge from 1972. "He fought so I could work front desk," she said. "You fight so my daughter won't get demoted for smiling with an accent." Khalil nodded, closing his fingers around it. Inside the room, the lights were brutal. Cameras everywhere. The hotel's lawyers sat across the aisle, stone-faced. Halston wasn't present. Not yet. Then came the twist. Just as Eleanor was opening her folder to speak, the courtroom doors opened, and a man in a navy suit entered. Theo, her son. Khalil didn't recognize him at first. The last time he'd seen Eleanor's son, it was in a photo, small, curly-haired, grinning with a toy ambulance. Now, he stood tall, visibly mixed-race calm. He walked straight to the podium. "Before you hear about numbers and trends," he said, voice steady, "I want to tell you what happened to me. At 16, I applied for Rosewood's youth leadership program. My application was discarded within a day. My mother's staff was told it didn't reflect the brand. I didn't know what that meant until I saw who did get in." He passed out photos. 8 white faces. No variations, no accents. Halston told people I wouldn't fit the image. He didn't know who my mother was, and he didn't care who I was. Gasps rippled through the room. Eleanor stood and added, "This wasn't about a mistake. This was about intent, and now we will prove it." Suddenly, the double doors swung open again. Halston. He looked thinner, older, But he still wore that smug restraint like a weapon. He walked with two lawyers in tow eyes, darting around the room until they landed on Khalil. Khalil didn't look away. He wanted Halston to see him, not as an employee, not as a liability, as the man who pulled back the curtain. The session ran 4 hours. Pages of evidence, voice recordings, testimonies. Every time Halston's team objected, there was documentation ready to counter it. It was like watching a dam crack. By the end, one thing was clear. This wasn't just one manager gone rogue. It was a culture, a machine, and it had finally met its reckoning. As they left the building, Tanya turned to Khalil and said, "Do you think he ever saw it coming?" Khalil shook his head. "He never saw any of us." That was the problem. What none of them knew as they walked down the courthouse steps was that Eleanor had just signed off on the final draft of a joint ownership lease. The building was already chosen, the design underway, and Khalil Evans was about to become something no one at Rosewood ever expected a founder. A founder. That word rang in Khalil's head, louder than any court verdict could. As they walked away from the courthouse into a humid Manhattan dusk, Eleanor handed him a folded blueprint, a lease agreement stamped and signed. "This space is yours," she said. "Yours to build, yours to protect." Khalil stood on the cracked sidewalk, holding the future like it was a fragile heirloom. The address read 119 West 134th Street. An old jazz club turned warehouse buried between a nail salon and a boarded-up bodega. Forgotten by the city, but not by its people. That night he went there alone. No lights, no signs. Just dust, exposed brick, and possibility. He walked through each corner, fingers tracing the faded outlines of a stage once alive with saxophones. In one corner, an old mural, chipped but proud, showed black chefs and waitresses serving families with joy, not hierarchy. That was it. That was the vision. He knew what he was going to build. He called it Second Look. The next 2 months were a hurricane. Permits, renovation teams, investor calls, training modules. But Khalil didn't want Second Look to be another startup charity experiment with photo ops and hollow mission statements. He wanted it to feel real, fair, revolutionary in its simplicity. So he started at the roots. He called Reggie back as head of pastry. Tanya returned to oversee service training. Lisa helped design the check-in system so no accent would be marked unfit. And most importantly, Khalil offered everyone profit sharing. Every worker was also a stakeholder. Nobody served, they represented. During staff orientation, he stood in the center of the dining room, unfinished hardwood underfoot, the air still thick with plaster dust, and said, "This place isn't about fixing what was broken. It's about showing we were never the broken ones." The room clapped. Some cried. Even Eleanor, usually steel-eyed and focused, paused long enough to whisper, "This is what I meant when I said you were the right one." And yet, even with walls painted, tables set, and reservations booked out for the first weekend, Khalil felt something unspoken still hung in the air, the need for vindication. Not for him, but for those who hadn't made it this far, the ones who left quietly, who never got a second look. So he reached out to someone who had vanished before the first leak ever happened. Marcos Alvarez, a former dishwasher who disappeared after filing a complaint about racial harassment from a supervisor. No one had heard from him in over a year. Khalil found him working at a mechanic shop in the Bronx. "You remember me?" Khalil asked, stepping into the garage. Marcos wiped grease off his hands, eyes narrowing. "You're the bartender who made the noise." "I'm the bartender who finally stopped being quiet," Khalil replied. "I'm building something. I want you in." Marcos didn't respond immediately. He walked around the car he'd been working on, tapped a wrench against the fender, then said, "They made me feel like my silence was a favor I owed them. That if I just took the pay, swallowed the shame, I could survive." "You're saying I don't have to." "I'm saying," Khalil said, stepping forward, "you deserve better than survival." 3 weeks later, Marcos walked into Second Look's kitchen with his own apron. Not one issued. one he had sewn his name into. He said he didn't want to be invisible ever again. The restaurant's launch was nothing short of seismic. Word spread fast. A new dining space run by people who'd once been erased, now setting the tone. The New York Times ran a headline, "Harlem's Second Look, where inclusion isn't policy, it's practice." But with success came retaliation. On opening night, someone spray-painted stick to back doors on the delivery entrance. The next morning, Khalil didn't flinch. He didn't hide it. He framed the wall. "We hang this by the host stand," he told his team. "Let every guest see what we're not afraid of." That choice made headlines too, but not everyone celebrated. Clarion Group's legal department released a vague statement suggesting defamation from disgruntled ex-employees. Halston, now silent, had reportedly taken up a consulting position for a mid-level hotel in Ohio. Word was, even there whispers followed him. Eleanor called Khalil a week later. "You've changed the story," she said. "But don't think they're done." "I'm not done either," he replied. What happened next proved he meant it. The National Labor Review Board reached out. They were opening a formal investigation into Clarion's hiring practices across all properties. And the testimony they needed was now being drafted by the very people Halston had once dismissed as replaceable. Second Look wasn't just a restaurant anymore. It was evidence. It was evidence. And evidence in the right hands doesn't just speak, it roars. By the time the National Labor Review Board's inquiry was publicly confirmed, Second Look had become more than a restaurant. It was a pressure point. The kind you don't press unless you're ready for what breaks. Khalil knew that. He also knew Clarion Group was feeling the squeeze. They weren't responding with lawsuits. They were responding with silence. Strategic, legal silence. The kind that corporations use when they know they've been caught, but still believe they can outlast you. Delay. Deny. Wait for the fire to burn out. But Khalil wasn't alone anymore. Former staff from Rosewood's Boston and D.C. branches began reaching out through private networks. A line cook named Nia emailed him photos of her demotion letter issued 1 week after she'd filed a discrimination complaint. A former concierge in Philadelphia named Deshawn uploaded an audio file of his supervisor admitting, "The Rosewood image doesn't lean urban." Khalil added their evidence to the growing drive stored on 2 encrypted SSDs, backed up 3 times 1 copy, held at Eleanor's Senate office. Meanwhile, inside Second Look business was thriving. But Khalil refused to let that success blind him. The team had adopted a weekly open forum where every employee from dishwasher to head chef spoke on operations culture, pay everything. It wasn't perfect. Sometimes it was messy. But it was honest. One Thursday evening during staff forum, Lisa stood up with tears in her eyes. "I worked 10 years at Rosewood and was never asked what I thought. This is the first job where my voice doesn't echo into a wall." Khalil just nodded. That was the mission. But even as the restaurant buzzed with hope, the shadow of Halston hadn't vanished. One morning, Tanya came in pale holding a white envelope with no return address. Inside was a single photo, her walking into the courthouse, with her daughter blurred in the background. No message, just implication. Khalil gathered the team privately and made a call to a security contact Eleanor had arranged. "We're not backing down," he said into the phone. "But we're not going to pretend this is over either." Eleanor arrived within the hour. She didn't give speeches. She simply handed Tanya a manila folder, legal protection orders, and emergency press contacts. "If they escalate," she said, "we escalate louder." And then something shifted. 1 week later, Clarion Group called a surprise press conference. Not to apologize, not to settle, but to deny everything. A board spokesperson took the podium and calmly announced, "We've conducted our own internal review and found no patterns of bias. The claims being circulated are anecdotal, unverified, and misleading." Khalil watched it live from the break room at Second Look. The room was silent. Every word felt like a punch in the ribs. But it was Quiet Marcos, who stood up and said, "If they want verified, we give them witnesses." That night, Khalil sent out the call. Not just to former employees, but to guests. People who had felt the shift. People who had been told they didn't fit the image. Families turned away. Couples separated at tables. And they answered. Within 72 hours, over 180 personal accounts poured in. Screenshots, videos, emails, dozens from customers who had once been silenced with a smile and a comped appetizer. Now they had names, dates, receipts. Then came the real twist. On a rainy Friday morning, an anonymous package arrived at Second Look. Inside a flash drive, a list of passwords and a post-it with 2 words, check HR. Lisa cracked it open in the back office, cross-referencing every login. Within minutes, the files spilled onto the screen. Names, demographic filters, internal classifications like frontier fit, cultural risk, and most damning too ethnic for primary rotation. It was the smoking gun. Eleanor's office confirmed the document's authenticity within hours. The metadata matched Clarion's internal system. What they found wasn't just discriminatory. It was algorithmic. Automated prejudice hidden inside HR software, calibrated to maintain a brand image without explicitly saying race. This was no longer a scandal. It was a civil rights breach. By that evening, Second Look was surrounded by press fans, protesters, students, labor activists. Inside, Khalil sat with the original team in the kitchen, the weight of the moment thick in the air. Reggie turned to him and said, "You think Halston ever thought this is how it would end?" Khalil stared at the door. He didn't think we were paying attention long enough to remember. What none of them knew yet was that Eleanor was already preparing her final strike, one that would not only expose Halston, but drag Clarion Group's entire board to the floor of the U.S. Senate. What none of them knew yet was that Eleanor was already preparing her final strike, one that would not only expose Halston, but drag Clarion Group's entire board to the floor of the U.S. Senate. The subpoena landed with the weight of a falling skyscraper, delivered not by messenger, but by federal officers. Within 72 hours, Eleanor Reed had moved the fight from the alleyways of discrimination to the very core of legislative power. Clarion Group's executive board was summoned to testify before the Senate Subcommittee on Labor and Equal Opportunity. The topic, institutional bias in corporate hiring systems. When Khalil saw the announcement on live TV, he was standing outside Second Look, watching a delivery truck unload fresh produce. The irony stung. He was restocking basil, while Clarion scrambled to rewrite decades of policy behind closed doors. But he smiled, because this wasn't irony. This was balance. Senator Reed called him 2 days before the hearing. "I want you to be in the chamber," she said. "Not as a guest, as a witness." Khalil hesitated. "I'm not a lawyer. I'm not a politician. I'm just—" "You're the reason this hearing exists," Eleanor interrupted. "You're the truth they hoped no one would believe." He showed up that morning in a charcoal suit borrowed from Reggie's cousin Hans, cold despite the summer heat. The halls of Capitol Hill echoed like cathedrals of old power, and for a brief moment he felt like that kid again, folding napkins in the rosewood basement, wondering how much smaller he'd have to become to stay employed. But not today. The hearing room was packed. Clarion's lawyers flanked the table like generals guarding a crumbling fort. On the other side, Eleanor sat flanked by labor experts, economists, and Khalil, whose name tag simply read, Mr. Khalil Evans, Hospitality Professional. The first hour was surgical. Eleanor unveiled the algorithmic classifications: to urban accent risk, aesthetic fit. Screens displayed internal memos where diversity was referred to as brand dilution. Senators leaned forward. Cameras flashed. But then she paused. "And now I'd like the committee to hear directly from someone who lived this." Khalil stood slowly. No script, no notes. "When I first got hired at the Rosewood Midtown, I thought I'd made it," he began. "But 3 months in, I realized I hadn't been hired for my talent. I'd been hired for my containment. I was told to smile, but not speak too much. Serve, but not ask questions. Watch, but never be seen." He looked at the Clarion board across the room. I was fired for helping a woman in distress. Not because I broke protocol, but because someone decided I didn't belong in the picture. And when I began asking why it wasn't just me, they tried to erase. It was all of us. The room was silent. Even the Clarion attorneys stopped writing. Khalil took a breath. I opened a place called Second Look, because everyone deserves one. Especially the people your system was designed not to see. The senators nodded. One leaned into the mic and asked, "Do you believe this system was designed intentionally?" Khalil didn't flinch. No one builds a cage by accident. Outside the chamber, the media had already begun crafting headlines. Bartender turned founder. Testifies in Senate bias probe. Algorithm of exclusion. The Rosewood scandal. Back in Harlem, Second Look paused service for 1 hour so the staff could watch Khalil's testimony on a mounted TV. Tanya cried quietly. Lisa held her hand. Marco said nothing but walked into the kitchen and added Khalil's name next to founding team on the chalkboard. The Senate hearing triggered a wave. Within a week, 5 major corporations suspended use of similar internal brand fit algorithms. Clarion's board issued a public statement, vague, but tinged with fear. Then came the real ending. Clarion's CEO resigned. Halston, already forced out quietly, was confirmed to have received performance bonuses tied directly to staff homogeneity retention rates. That phrase alone triggered a Justice Department inquiry. And still, Khalil didn't celebrate. He went back to work, back to Harlem, back to Second Look, where the line out the door wrapped around the block on weekends, and staff meetings began with shared stories, not performance metrics. But one night, as he closed up alone, Eleanor walked in. "I won't stay long," she said. "Just wanted to give you something." She handed him a folded paper, a signed agreement, funding for 3 new cooperatively owned restaurants modeled after Second Look. One in Atlanta, one in Chicago, one in Oakland. "We're scaling the model," she said, "but only if you lead it." Khalil looked around. The walls still smelled like spice and hope. He thought of his mother who once said, "You build your dignity like a wall, one honest brick at a time." He smiled. "Then let's start laying brick." And just like that, a fight that began with silence became a blueprint for something permanent. Something just. Something that no algorithm could erase.